Welcome to your weekly dose of NFL Jibber Jabber, the Club Dub Football Podcast. Remember to follow on Twitter, Insta, and watch video shows each week on YouTube. Want to get in touch? That's easy. Message through social or email clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
Welcome to the Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
The guys are ready, so let's hand over to Rob Rose, JB, PB and Aldrin, and get on with the show.
Hi gents.
Hi Rob.
Wow, the NFL season is rolling on. Plenty to talk about. Lots to see here. And interestingly, not only do I think we come off a week that was far more exciting than I ever thought it would be, and far more interesting than I thought it would be, I also, looking at the games ahead, thought a couple of weeks ago I got the hang of this. Thought it was pretty easy. We knew who the good teams were. We knew who the not so good teams were. And everything seems to have changed. In a slate of games that feels like the vast majority are real coin flip ties for me, I can't wait to get your insight and input. But before we get as far ahead as that, let's start off with our brief round the room recap of the last week of NFL action. And Aldrin, I'm going to start with you. What were your thoughts on week 7?
I thought it was great. I think kind of like you said there, really, just when you thought you knew what some teams were about and who some teams were, out of the blue, suddenly, it all changed. I think the Bengals game is probably the most noteworthy one of the slate of games, just purely because of how, I guess, comprehensively they beat the Ravens, really. It wasn't, a 3-point game or something like that. They put a really good result on them. The Chiefs, I think that's the first time in the Mahomes era that they haven't scored a touchdown and looked well off the pace. So, yeah, I just thought it was a bit disappointing, really, for them. They're not the team that we thought they were, and they certainly, we talked about the defensive struggles a little bit, but the offensive struggles, I think, are probably the most noteworthy, really. But yeah, I think, like you said, as is evidenced by our Club Dub prediction league, I'm struggling to pick the right results. So there you go.
Well, don't feel bad. I mean, in basically a competition where JB always picks against the Ravens, he's helped this week purely by the fact the Ravens lost in a surprise defeat to the Bengals. So, yeah, I think it was a near impossible week to call. And I think there's so much we've got to get into. I mean, how many weeks are we going to talk about the Chiefs needing a get-right game? And how many weeks are we going to predict that this week's going to be the week? I mean, every other talk radio show that has any interest in American football is absolutely dominated by the trade deadline and the Chiefs. And I'm sure we'll get onto it. But yeah, an absolute storyline in the making there, particularly if the Raiders keep it up. But anyway, I digress. JB, your thoughts on week 7?
My thoughts on week 7 are the same as Aldrin's. I was going to sum it up as basically we're starting week 8 and we still don't know who's good and we still don't know who's bad, because we've got, and obviously I'm going to start with this, but we've gone from a Ravens team that dominated a Chargers team that we thought was something really, really special to then come in and getting blown out by the Bengals all of a sudden. The Chiefs, like kind of Rob said, we keep every week is like, this will be the week they right the ship. This will be the week they right the ship. And it's a little bit like that gag in The Simpsons where Bart and Homer are chasing down the pig. It's just a little dirty. It's still good. It's still good. They've just lost to the Giants. They're still good. They're still good, figuratively speaking. And I don't think last week was particularly good. I don't really, obviously I got a certain amount of enjoyment out of one game specifically, but otherwise I just thought it was a little bit lackluster. It was a little bit down in comparison. But ultimately we've come out with still so many talking points from it that it was also good at the same time.
PB, follow that.
Well, I disagree on a couple of points there, to be honest. I thought it was a pretty interesting and entertaining slate of games on Sunday. If you think to the Bengals, I think blowing out the Ravens was a surprise. And it was more of a blowout because the Ravens went for it on fourth a couple of times and didn't get it, which left the Bengals in good field position. I also think it was interesting, albeit the Lions lost to the Rams, they onside kicked the second kick of the game. They fake punted twice. I think that made it an interesting spectacle, and we're still in it, right into the fourth quarter when driving down the field, Goff threw an interception. So it kind of proved the Rams right in a way, that they were doing it against them. He was doing it against them rather than for them. But I also disagree on the point that we don't know who's good and who's bad. Like, I think we know 5 of the playoff teams in the NFC already, and there's only 2 other spots to play for. If you look, the Cowboys are going to win their division. They're 5-1. Everyone else is 2-5. The Cardinals 7-0, and the Rams 6-1. They're both going to come out of that division. The Packers are 6-1, and the Bucks are 6-1, and they're probably both, and barring something crazy, are probably going to both win their divisions as well. So I think there's only 2 spots to play for left in the NFC. You kind of think the Saints at 4-2 will get one of those. And then it's, who's going to finish best out of Vikings, Falcons, Panthers. I think there's only a spot, maybe 2 spots at best to play for. So I think NFC wise, we know where we're at.
Oh, I'm certainly not ready to back the Cardinals. I don't know. Part of me wants to get absolutely on the bandwagon, being a Cards fan for as long as I have been, to think that this could be a Super Bowl year. We often reference it, don't we, like the 85 Bears, or I know they're lost in the Super Bowl, but we tend to reference the 2015 Panthers a lot, don't we, as those teams who just have those magic seasons where it all seems to come together. My interesting takeaways, I think I loved all of those in part. There's nothing I'd necessarily shout up against. I still think there are some really tough games to pick. You are probably right, PB, that probably the AFC feels a little more uncertain than the NFC. But for me, what seems so interesting is teams falling out of love with their quarterbacks at the moment, or teams having real question marks about what's going on at quarterback. Maybe it's just, the trade deadline upon us, and Deshaun Watson as a top 5 talent in the league at that position probably makes a lot of teams look at that room and think, could they do with a shift? Could they do with a change? But yeah, I think I'm surprised how many teams are panicking, surprised how many teams are improving and not improving. There just seems to be a storyline everywhere. And that is one of the things that I think makes this week quite so interesting, quite so intriguing and exciting, really. You can kind of make a case for a lot of different things to happen in the slate of games that are going to roll around largely on Sunday. So
one thing I didn't realise,
go on.
To jump in, I'm looking at the AFC playoff picture now. If the playoffs started today based on current standings, the Bengals have the bye in the first round. Yeah. And who would have picked that before the season? It's crazy. Well,
the Bengals-Ravens game at the weekend was the first time those two had played for the leadership of the division, to take the division lead in a ridiculous amount of time. I think there was one game maybe in 2015 very early on where one of them would have jumped into that. But an actual meaningful AFC tie between those two feels like it's not really occurred for an awfully long time. And like I said, we're going to get into it, but do you know what? Are the Steelers going to be part of this picture? I'm not sure. The Browns, there's so many question marks that side. I think it does make for fascinating watching as an NFL fan. So we're going to get some of these topics with our picks of the game of the week. We're also going to get into some of these topics when we do pick in our hot topic later, where we'd love to see Deshaun Watson or another notable quarterback talent be traded and why. But before then, let's roll around. Let's pick out the highlights of the slate. And Aldrin, which game have you pitched for and why?
So the game I've gone for this week is, I don't know if I feel good about it or bad about it, but I went for the Titans against the Colts this week, purely because I think it's starting to hot up as an interesting matchup. The Titans obviously coming off a monster win against the Kansas City Chiefs, who I think probably roundly we would have all said that, could have gone the way of the Chiefs if we'd been predicting last week. The Colts coming off a pretty strong, impressive win against the 49ers, and having won 3 out of the last 4 games. I know the Ravens game didn't go our way, but for long periods of that game, we looked the better team until Lamar Jackson kind of turned it on in the fourth quarter. So I think it poses a real intrigue now. I think this could really shape how the division goes. I think the Titans look the pick that you would say would end on top. But the Colts are starting to look much more coherent. Wentz is looking much more comfortable. They're riding Jonathan Taylor more at running back, and that's, providing 100-yard games and multiple touchdown games. So, yeah, I just think it's an intrigue, really. The only caveat that I would say that worries me as a Colts fan is our secondary's looking a bit banged up at the minute, and Tannehill, for large portions of that Chiefs game, looked in pretty good command of the air. He met, he found passes to AJ Brown pretty frequently and comfortably. And I think if they lean on that side of the game, then they'll do very well. But I think it's a real close matchup.
Well, we talked, I think, week 3 or 4 about teams that, it wasn't too late for them to turn their season around. The Titans have had the marquee wins, I suppose you'd say, haven't they? They've really toppled some of the, the previous AFC superpowers, on their road to this. But, I just can't believe that, 3 weeks ago, you'd have never picked the Titans as, the class of the AFC. In fact, we were predicting the opposite, weren't we? Just that they were, an absolute disappointment. You've had the Bills, who've had some interesting results, who I think probably 3 weeks ago were, very much the class of that conference. You know what? It feels strange. Here's the thing. You kind of think if the Titans go out and win and put on a good performance, you go, well, hold on. That's probably what's expected. Form dictates when you're beating this good an opposition in the last 3 weeks of the season that you should be able to take care of and handle an improving Colts team. Having said that, if the Colts win, the Titans could very well be the big confidence boosting win that they need to have this kind of Titans-like resurgence. So there is an awful lot to pick out there, isn't there? And I think you're right with Wentz. I think as much as the weather played a part, and it would be unfair to say it was a game of who made the least mistakes against the 49ers, certainly to see him in command in such poor conditions on the road with everything that was going on in that game, I thought showed a degree of improvement and an improved level of comfort in that offense for Wentz. So I think you're right. The Colts are starting to look like they could put it together. But for me, Derrick Henry would still be the wrecking ball against pretty much any team. I think only the Cardinals in week 1, and how much of that was the week 1 effect really, were able to bottle him up. As much as I think you're right, JB and I were discussing this on Sunday about Tannehill, I think he's, pretty much the perfect fit for that offense. Not to say that he's the best quarterback in the league or anything like that, but I think he's such a good fit for what they try and do. Whereas JB feels he kind of limits them and he gives the Titans a ceiling of sorts. But you know what? Neither storyline would surprise me. The Colts get the marquee win and they start rolling. The Titans continue with their steamrollering form, beating everyone in their wake. But then neither would either of those teams scoring 3 points, and all of a sudden being back in the doldrums of where did it all go wrong. So, yeah, love the pick. I'm just not sure I can pick who'd go in Club Dub myself.
Yeah, Rob is correct. I think my opinion of the Titans is kind of clouded by they'll go as far as Ryan Tannehill will let them. And that's not necessarily implying that Tannehill is a bad quarterback by any means. I think his time in Tennessee has really rehabilitated his image, but I think he's not a quarterback of the same top quality franchise caliber that you can see at other people. And I'm not entirely sure that Carson Wentz is either, but I think we all knew that with enough time, Frank Reich would be able to get that offense going, get Carson Wentz looking a bit more like the Carson Wentz that he had in Philadelphia that looked like he was on track for like an MVP, if not an MVP award, at least serious consideration for it. So I think this game has come around at the right time for both teams because they've both had that opportunity to get the early season stutters out of the way, to sort of find what they're going to do, get back in touch with themselves, the spirit of what they're going to be as a football team, and really move forward with that. So this has got, obviously this has got division implications. This has got potentially playoff implications. And for me, it would be the Titans need to show that they aren't going to be a stop and start team. So, they had a really good performance last week against the Chiefs. They need to build on that and carry on and show that dominance against the Colts. Whereas the Colts really need to do exactly the same thing. This is a Colts performance that needs to show we aren't the team that we were 2-3 weeks ago that keeps losing. We are the team that can get momentum and keep momentum and build and build and build from there. It's both teams going into it with the same needs and the same goal. And much like the Highlander, there can be only one. And I'm not sure who I'd pick for this.
I love your point, JB. I mean, the only thing to say, as you're talking about, the Titans building off great wins, their loss, the loss that preceded this run of wins was to the New York Jets. I mean, that's a loss. That is absolutely a kick in the shins in NFL terms. So their rise has been impressive. I think for me with Tannehill, he just fits what, the weird thing, you look at Tannehill at the Titans, you look at Wentz at the Colts. I don't think swapping those two quarterbacks makes either of those teams better. I don't think Tannehill improves the Colts, but weirdly, I don't think Wentz would improve the Titans. I think they've just found reasonable fits. But go on, Phil, give your input before Aldrin has to make, he's a Colts fan, but in my opinion, a pretty tough decision.
Yeah, for me, I don't think it's a tough one. I think the Titans are going to run all over the Colts. I know the Colts have won, 3 games in a row? Well, they've won 3 games total anyway, but for me, I don't think they're a particularly good team this year. I know Wentz has improved. I don't particularly rate Wentz. I know he's improved his kind of interception rate, and he's got one of the lowest interception rates in the league so far this season, which is obviously an improvement from the most when he was at the Eagles last year. But for me, I just don't think they're going to stop Derrick Henry. I think he's in a real rich vein of form at the moment. Talking about MVP level potentially, and I know that's unlikely for a running back, but he's looked absolutely dominant at times. So for me, I think the Titans are just going to run over them. If they don't though, and the Colts only get to 1 game back from the Titans, then it brings the division into play again a little bit. But yeah, for me, it's Titans in this one.
So Aldrin, you're left with the tough decision. I won't say head or heart, because I think you could make a pretty strong argument for the Colts with your head, if you follow logic other than Phil's. But go on, give us our first team this week going into Club Dub.
I have gone a little bit with heart this week, purely because I do think we're on the rise a little bit. And I don't know, with that Titans team, I don't know if they just come off the Chiefs game believing their own hype a little bit and slip up like they did against the Jets. So yeah, I've gone for the Colts this week.
Can I just interject 1 second?
No.
So we're talking about, you could make a case for your head with the Colts. The Colts have won 3 games, and their 3 games they've won are against the Dolphins, the Texans, and the 49ers, who I don't think any of them are particularly good teams this year.
The Titans are the only team all season to have lost to the Jets, who must be the worst team in the NFL.
Also true. But I think everybody can have an anomaly, can't they? So I don't know. It's be interesting. I guess this will be the marker for the Colts as to whether they are, with it this year or not.
Thanks, Phil.
Let's play the music. The signal. So, JB, you get to go second this week. And of all, last week on the podcast, you said you weren't maybe as excited by this slate of games as previous weeks. I think this week, I've said it already, is a barnstormer. Where are you taking us?
I am taking us to Detroit, Michigan, to talk about the Eagles and the Lions. And
no, you're not.
I am indeed.
No.
And I am maybe bringing this game up because I want to talk about this for the consequences afterwards, maybe not necessarily the game itself, because it's coming to one major question about the Lions. If the Lions don't win this week against the Eagles, when are they going to win? And if you look at the Lions schedule after the Eagles, it goes Steelers, Browns, Bears, Vikings, Broncos, Cardinals, Falcons, Seahawks, and Packers. there is not an awful lot in there that I think we could see this current incarnation of the Detroit Lions doing that well against. We've seen them have success in games recently with that kind of unexpected, out there, wacky kind of plays, like, you know, getting some points and then immediately going for an onside kick that you get with your first kickoff of the game. But they can't carry that on throughout the game. You can't keep surprising the opponent because there's only so many things that you can do well enough to actually surprise them. And when the Lions need to be a competent, straightforward, enough with the trick plays, but run the dang ball, they can't really do that. And if they can't really do that against an Eagles team that, wow, are they absolutely all over the place? I don't know when it's going to happen. From the Eagles' point of view, you've got to be hoping, if you're an Eagles fan, that they're looking at this as, okay, here is an opportunity for us to have a statement game, make an example of the Lions and show that we aren't out of the race yet either. Yes, it's looking like it's going to be a Cowboys victory at the end of this, but the Eagles can stay in it. The Eagles can keep it interesting at the very least. But to do that, they need to beat teams like the Lions. And this is exactly what I talked about last week with the Cardinals and the Texans. That was a trap game potentially for the Cardinals. It was a risk to the Cardinals' undefeated streak coming into it, especially with what came out after we'd recorded the podcast with like Cliff Kingsbury and every other coach like still having COVID issues and things like that. So the Eagles need to do the same thing here. They obviously feel good about their quarterback room because they've happily traded Joe Flacco away to the Jets to bump Gardner Minshew up the depth chart, which means they can't be unsure about Jalen Hurts because you wouldn't be playing around with your experienced quarterback if you had doubts about the ability of your starting quarterback. So the Eagles must feel this is the best team for them. They are set up to win. They just need to go out and do it. And the Lions presents the best opportunity for it. From a Lions point of view, as rah-rah and bite your kneecaps off as Dan Campbell is before a game and as kind of humbled and, I mean, you do just feel a bit sorry for him at times, don't you? Afterwards, you've just got to do it in those 4 quarters. And when's it actually going to happen?
Well, I'll start by saying you just read off a list of fixtures and said if it doesn't happen for the Lions this week, when does it happen? Well, next week against the Steelers, based on your reckoning. I give them half a chance there against I don't know, how good are the Steelers this season? Maybe discussion point for next week.
It's a very interesting opinion that you have put forward there, Rob. You are wrong, but it's very interesting.
I'll enjoy it when I'm not. So in terms of the Lions, I've said it over and over, they can't do the basics well. And the problem is that you're right. You know, the trick plays that were shocks and surprises on Sunday won't be shocks and surprises next Sunday. You know, do you not think that the Eagles will have half an eye on an onside kick or a fake punt? It's, you know, as much as I love that fake punt, particularly for Scott's gag on red zone, you know, they still fell well short. You know, the head coach, Dan Campbell, is hideously out of his depth. If he thinks Jared Goff is the problem, he's deluded. I think, you know, Goff has so little around him. DeAndre Swift has so little to work with. They've got real problems, the Lions. And if they stick with Dan Campbell long term, and by long term, I mean kind of into next season, I can't see their fortunes changing, really. That said, the Eagles, you know, we talk about this, what type of team are they? We talked about the Falcons a couple of weeks ago and said they'd been good in quarters. They'd just not put it together for a whole game. And do you know what? Ever since, they kind of have, and the Falcons are starting to do a little better, starting to use Pitts and so on and so forth. But actually, I think the Eagles are kind of now in that space for me where we've seen good things, and we've seen good things against good teams. What we haven't really seen is any kind of consistency or any kind of confidence that they're going to go out there and be able to perform, control the football, and all of the things that ultimately good teams are able to do. Neither team winning would surprise me. And with a Lions team as bad as they are, I suppose that's a pretty damning indictment for the Eagles. Your point around Joe Flacco, I mean, God, they must have thought Christmas came early when they were getting anything for Joe Flacco. He's going to do nothing for the Jets. I mean, a great quarterback in his day. This just isn't his day. bless him. I think Joe's running a little too long.
For me, I've just literally changed my prediction. I initially went for the Eagles on this one. But you know what? I've seen a bit more promise from the Lions over the last few weeks. And that, you can't argue that they didn't push the Rams close. And the Rams, I would say, are probably one of the better teams in the conference. So, I've seen the Eagles firsthand when they played the Bucks on Thursday Night Football a couple of weeks ago, and they didn't really offer anything at all. The score was closer than it probably should have been due to the Bucks' own performance. So for me, I think it's going to be it could be one of those games where it's really high scoring because they're both two bad teams, or it could be a game that's really low scoring because neither of them can get anything going on offense. But Miles Sanders being out is going to be interesting. That's going to affect the Eagles' run game, albeit they've not used him particularly well this year. And I think DeAndre Swift is showing good form this year, and I think he'll be able to run through the Eagles a bit. So I've actually changed, and I think I'm going to say the Lions are going to get a win. It may be their only win this season, as JB said, but I'm going to go for a Lions win this week.
God, that is controversial. Aldrin, round out your thoughts on this game of the week, which, as I see it, is a race to the bottom.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I'm not a fan of either quarterback particularly. I think Jalen Hurts continues for me to look a little bit out of his depth as a QB1. Goff, I think, is just in a terrible situation on a terrible team that's terribly coached. So I think I'm with you to say that Goff's the problem is completely wrong. I think the only bright sparks on that team is Goff in spells and DeAndre Swift. He looks like an actual playmaker on that offense. I can't see anybody else doing that. I think the one thing I have with Goff is he far too often looks for TJ Hawkinson when other players are more open. I think he's probably Hawkinson's the only player that he trusts outside of Swift. But I do think that shows, and it makes it easy to predict where they're going to pass. Eagles defense has looked all right in spells, but equally they've had some good opponents come up against them. I think the problem with the Raiders game was that the Raiders were pretty much out of sight before the Eagles got anything good going on offense, and it was far too late. I'm kind of with you. I see enough from the Eagles though to think that they'll beat a really poor Lions team. So I do think they'll come out on top, but equally, I don't think they're a good team, but that's just where it is.
One thing to think about with the Eagles, and Rob, you've made me think of it when you said it's a race to the bottom. They've got 3 first-round picks next year, and there's something like 3, 7, and 12. 3 really well-placed first-round picks. So I suppose it depends what you want to do with them. Do they feel confident that they can restock and retool a little bit through the draft next year, or when it comes to our later topic about a quarterback who may or may not be available, is that a potential landing spot for them to try and do something this season? If the Eagles were to win this game, I think that puts them at 3-5, and if the Cowboys were to lose to the Vikings, potentially that puts them at 5-2. It's albeit I said the Cowboys are going to make the playoffs, actually there's still the potential there for something else to happen in that division. So I think the Eagles need to win it to have any playoff hopes. And if they do, then it might see, a domino fall in the trade market potentially if they see things going that way.
You know what, that's a good shout. There are probably, as close as we are at the trade deadline, and you've seen it a bit with the Cardinals going and getting Zach Ertz, as much as they went and got a player, because they'd lost, they'd seen Dan Arnold go at the end of last season from Arizona, and then Max Williams get injured. That's the kind of trade made by a team that feels it's a contender, right? That's a kind of trade made by a team who feels that they've possibly got a chance this season. You wonder, off the back of a good performance this weekend, would teams like the Panthers, the Eagles, there's a number of them who may just start to think, well, hold on here. Is there an opportunity if we go and get that final piece of the puzzle? You wonder if anyone might overstretch even in the last few days. But yeah, I don't know, for all of the points that we're making here, JB, I don't know if you and I see this differently. I see the Lions playing very hard for Dan Campbell. What I don't see is a team that's well coached or organised, and that for me at the sharp end, at the very top level, is a real problem. But ultimately, it's your pick. I mean, Phil's already amazed me by thinking the Lions are going to do this. Maybe you'll do the same.
Not only am I ushering this club into Club Dub this week, but I am doing so with a special request for the DJ to accompany it by Fly Eagles Fly. The Philadelphia Eagles are going to win this week.
Colts and Eagles in Club Dub. Absolutely love it. So far, so good. For all of the chat about the Lions, I was really fearful you were going the other way. But yeah, I think, the weird thing, Phil, when you said that if the Eagles would be, 3-5 would they be if they win this week? I think that's probably where the Eagles feel they should be, really. I necessarily think they're any better than that. I think that's something to build off with the new head coach. But anyway, I'm going to throw over to you, PB. Come on, game of the week. Take us somewhere slightly more glamorous than Philly and the Lions.
Well, you'll be happy. I've resisted the urge of going for the Jameis Winston revenge game, which I think will be a highlight of the week. And I've picked what I feel is probably a neutral would argue is the game of this slate of games. And I've gone for the Packers at the Cardinals. I just think this is going to be an absolute barnstormer, and probably the best game of Thursday night football this season. You could argue you've got the Packers. I think it's the first time that two teams on a 6-game winning streak have either met or have met on Thursday night football. There's some stat I saw. And, the Cardinals are undefeated, 7 games this season, looking really good. You could argue that their strength of schedule hasn't been amazing, but then they've beat everyone that's been put in front of them. They beat a really good Rams team, who you'd argue are a contender to go deep in the playoffs. And then you've got the Packers, who had a lot of controversy in the off-season, obviously with Aaron Rodgers, will he stay, will he go, and all that kind of jazz. They had a rough week 1 against the Saints where they just couldn't get anything going. And then since then, they've played lights out football. So I think it's going to be a real intriguing contest. I think it will be a battle of offense, who gets the ball last. It could be, quite easily see that happening. I think the Packers have been hit by COVID, though, with the defensive coordinator, I think, is missing the game, and also Devontae Adams. Obviously, Devontae Adams is a massive part of their offense. He's arguably one of the top 5, if not more, receivers in the league. But I think they've got enough outside of that. Aaron Jones, I think, had a game this season where he put up like three scores, didn't he, quite early in the season? So it's entirely possible that they could just focus on the run rather than the pass and kind of beat teams that way. So I think for me, if I'm the Cardinals, I'm putting everything on stopping the run, because behind Adams, there's not a massive amount for Rodgers to throw to. Maybe Valdez Scantling and Tunyon are going to have good games, but outside of that, there's no highlight reel players that you think, oh yeah, they can have a massive game in Adams' absence. And the Cardinals have obviously got an embarrassment of riches. Murray's got a plethora of options there with Hopkins, Green, Kirk, Rondale Moore as well, who's had a couple of bright moments this season too, and obviously the addition of Zach Ertz as well, who made a big deal, and a big impact on Sunday. So I think, looking at the schedule, if the Cardinals win this one and go 8-0, they've got a real shot at finishing the season undefeated, and they've got to play the Rams again, which I think the Rams are going to want revenge for that game initially this season. But if you look at the rest of their schedule, it's not, there aren't any real big games that you think, I'm not sure who'll win that one based on current form. They play the 49ers, Panthers, Seahawks, Bears. Then there's that Rams game, and after that they're playing Lions, Colts, Cowboys, Seahawks. So there's a couple of games where if teams are on form, they could do it, but I could see it within the realm of possibility that they finish undefeated. That'd be no surprise. And then the Packers, if they win this, they're 7-1, the same, the same form as the Cardinals are as well, the same results, the same standings. So that then puts the week 1 bye in the playoffs up for grabs between, 3 or 4 different teams in the NFC. So it's a real pick'em game this week, and I think it's going to be a real great game and a good spectacle to watch.
I think the only thing as a Cardinals fan, and it's going to be Cardinals input that I have in this conversation to mention, is how good the Cards defense have been. In a horrible game against the 49ers, they absolutely held San Fran to, so few points. I think it was equaling an NFL record. There was 4 fourth down stops that the Cardinals defense made. You look at them last weekend, even against the Texans, we were 5-0 down with an odd combination of a safety and a field goal. But actually, we started really slowly on offense and have done a few times. The Browns would be another example of that. Started really slowly. And it's only really the offense getting the ball back, us winning the turnover differential that's kind of allowed the offense to hit its stride. When the offense does, God, it does. It's got a Chiefs-like ability to put up points quickly. And you saw us kind of, having gone 5-0 down against the Texans, 31 unanswered points after that to see us through to the win and ultimately ending the fourth quarter with backups in for the second straight week. So I don't know. On the one hand, I fancy the Cardinals against anybody, including the Packers. I think we're a good team and we'll take some beating. I don't see us as the kind of team that will have an unbeaten season. But just to add a last little thing, offensively, Zach Ertz has got a great opportunity just because of how much space there is in the middle of the field. When you look at Green and Hopkins and the way they're utilized, and even more, they're not taking up those slots in the middle of the field. They're leaving that space for Kirk and for Ertz particularly. And do you know what? He could end up being a real difference maker if he can keep up this early form. I think things bode well.
I think that the big thing that's going to affect this game is just who is actually going to be out for the Packers. Because I know, like Phil's already said, there's a couple of people out, but everything that I'd read so far suggested that there could potentially be more. They just weren't sure yet. So what kind of team is Aaron Rodgers going to be throwing to? Because as good as Rodgers is, and we've discussed this numerous times, he's not having the kind of season where he's lifting everybody else up. I think this is the kind of season where he's asking for everybody to kind of come up to his level as well. And they're not really doing that. This doesn't look like the same kind of dominant Packers and dominant Aaron Rodgers offense that we saw last year. Meanwhile, the Cardinals just keep on rolling. It took a little bit of time to get going against the Texans at the weekend just gone, but I think it was very much like a great boxing match. You spend the first little bit just using your jab, circling, trying to control the ring, and then once you've got that breakthrough, it's just swing away until the other guy goes down. And that's kind of what it felt like for the Cardinals. It was very tentative, and then all of a sudden, bombs away. And one of the things, I don't think we talked about this, but one of the things I think people were talking about afterwards is how successful the Cardinals are being at all levels of the offense without Kyler Murray really running the football. He's not having to run a lot. You're getting great production from Rondale Moore as a rookie, from DeAndre Hopkins, from Christian Kirk, from AJ Green, and you're getting great running plays from James Conner and Chase Edmonds. Like at the weekend, I think DeAndre Hopkins had 50 yards, AJ Green had 50 yards, and Christian Kirk had 60. Or I may have got Kirk and AJ Green mixed up there. But essentially, it's not one big performance from everybody like we've seen with the Bengals and Jamar Chase and the Packers and Devontae Adams. It's effective, efficient contributions from everybody that's leading to wins. And I can't see much past the Cardinals' victory at the moment, especially if the defense plays like it did at the weekend.
It's almost like with the Cardinals, you cut off one head and then anyway. No, sorry, Aldrin, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of all of your points, really. I think the Packers have won a lot of games, but equally they've played an awful lot of poor teams. I know you talked about that, Phil, earlier with the Colts, but equally I think, the Packers are, who've they beaten really? They've beaten the Bears, Washington, the Steelers, the Lions, and got roundly beaten in the first game by the Saints. So out of all of the teams they've beaten, the two good teams that you would say they've beaten are the 49ers and the Bengals, and they were both 2 3-point games. So they were incredibly close. And I think for me, that's probably the point with the Packers, is that their defense isn't good enough at the minute to let their offense run away with it. It's always very much tit for tat in a lot of games. And I think you run a real risk playing that way against somebody like the Cardinals at the minute, who are going to put up 30 plus points on you. I mean, straight off the bat, it's going to be 30 points. I think, like you said, Rob, Ertz coming in just adds another potent weapon across the middle. He had the longest touchdown of his career the other night, and that was purely because all of the coverage and attention is on the guys out wide. It's on Kirk and AJ Green and Hopkins, and then naturally you can't cover everybody. And Ertz is athletic enough and talented enough to take those opportunities. And I think, I'm kind of with James. I think I can only see a Cardinals win here, but do I think it'll be close? Yeah. I think the Packers will do well to keep pace with them, but I think they've got the talent there to do it. But equally, without Devontae Adams, you do worry a bit for them, that they're thin on wide receivers with talent outside of him.
The only thing, Phil, before I let you make your decision, is if the game is close, and I mean, Aldrin says I can't see anything but Cardinals, I can absolutely see a Packers win. I think it's a coin flip for me. But if it comes down to special teams, Mason Crosby's a worry, isn't he, all of a sudden? I mean, I know he kind of writes himself, but I don't know, he always looks like the kind of guy this season who could nail every kick or send them spinning left or right at every opportunity. I think I have more faith in Matt Prater if it comes down to those small numbers and those fine margins. But anyway, PB, put a team in Club Dub for me.
So I've gone different to you guys in 3 of our 4 games of the week. So 3 of the 4 games of the week, you've all gone the same, and I've gone with the other team, and I've done that on this case. I think the Packers, I made a prediction before I found out Adams and the DC were out. I still think they can do it. I think they're going to come through. I don't think the Cardinals will have the undefeated season, but it generally could go either way, but I'm going to stick my head on the line and go Packers. Figuratively, not literally.
And the music plays for Green Bay. I don't know, do Green Bay have a thing? Nobody fires cannons for Green Bay, right? But there you go, the Packers in Club Dub, and I just get to look at the sunny, shiny figure that I've picked for my game of the week, and actually maybe I'm slightly regretful of suggesting that the Lions against the Eagles wasn't necessarily a sparkling fixture, because I have gone for the Carolina Panthers against the Atlanta Falcons. And initially, when I kind of picked it, I thought to myself, well, one team gets the win this weekend. I think for all the trials and tribulations and the ups and the downs, and the Falcons and the Panthers have almost been mirror images of each other, right? The Panthers got off to that amazing start and seem to have slowed right down. The Falcons are kind of coming back, although maybe not as triumphantly as the Panthers started. But actually, the more I've thought about it, there is a different storyline here that's kind of had me thinking really for the last 24 hours or so. And it was because I started thinking about Sam Darnold when I was thinking about the Carolina Panthers and how big we all were on Darnold in the offseason, the fact that he'd been wasted with the Jets, and what he needed was an opportunity where he had coaches who believed in him, he had talent around him, and he would do big things. And I seem to remember, was it week 2 or 3 when we were all watching Red Zone and chatting away? I think I put a message on WhatsApp that said something like, Sam Darnold is legit. I think he'd just run in for his 5th rushing touchdown of the year or something crazy. And then ever since then, it just seems to have gone awry for him and for the Panthers more generally, particularly with these rumors swirling now that Deshaun Watson could end up in Carolina, and they're already thinking in Carolina of ways that they might be able to move on from Darnold. And the bit that's really kind of got me thinking is this. I was trying to think, what does this situation remind me of? You know, this situation where Darnold goes from being absolutely red hot to 3 weeks later, people thinking that his time with the franchise is probably up. I mean, ultimately getting benched at the weekend because of the way he was playing. And then it struck me that what this reminds me of is last season's Carolina Panthers, right? Where they had Teddy Bridgewater, who wasn't maybe as good as Darnold at the start of the season, but they went from being really in on Bridgewater. You know, he'd come to play with coaches he'd had in New Orleans, who'd seen him backing up Breeze and saw that he still had the it factor. And then actually towards the end of the season, not only did all kind of poke and impetus and drive seem to go out of the Panthers, all of that belief in Teddy seemed to go as well. And I'm now starting to think, and maybe this is, I'm just too big on Darnold. Maybe it is that I'm just, you know, keeping the faith a little long. But is Matt Rule potentially the problem here? You know, Matt Rule is on a mega money deal, long-term contract with the vision of creating this culture in Carolina that are going to turn them into perennial contenders, you know, in the next 5 years. And actually, I think for somebody who should be thinking long-term plan, are we not just seeing somebody who's a bit hot and cold and somebody who maybe tinkers a bit too much and somebody who doesn't stay the course and keep the faith? Now, with Bridgewater, one of the arguments was always, well, do you know what? He lost Christian McCaffrey early in the year and that really took a dimension away. Well, I mean, don't look now, but it kind of feels like we're in the midst of a carbon copy. So when I talk about teams who might approach the trade deadline differently compared to this weekend, I think the Carolina Panthers would be absolutely at the top of my list. You know, a 3-touchdown performance by Darnold, you know, and a comfortable win possibly makes you think, well, hold on, maybe we're being a bit hasty. Maybe we do just see how this thing plays out. But do you know what? For the Falcons, not really having been incredible, although I think getting Pitts involved has probably been a big difference maker for them. The Falcons are certainly good enough that if you have a bad day, they'll make you pay for that. You know, Ridley and Gage looked good at the weekend and you kind of got a sense of how much they were missed. And as much as I don't think they're superstar receivers or ever likely to be, they're the kind of players that can put up points. You know, I have more faith in the Falcons putting up points than, I don't know, say the Eagles even, and certainly teams like the Lions. So all of a sudden, I think this could be a really big game for the Panthers, not only this season, but further afield. And that's what made it the standout tie for me.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think the Falcons are exactly that you just said, really. They're a team that's good enough to put points up against you if you're having a bad day. You know, we saw them recently, you know, in London, and they were, I would say they were quite impressive. They certainly when they get Kyle Pitts involved, they look a much better beast. You know, I think relying on Ridley and others is only going to get you so far. I think Pitts is the real difference maker. And I think he's had, obviously we saw him before their bye week, and I think he had 120 yards in that game. And then at the weekend, I think he had something like 160 yards, you know, so he's the real go-to target. And you can understand why. I mean, we talked about when he came out of college, he looks like that prototypical wide receiver / tight end in kind of his physical makeup and his attributes. Matty Ice, I think you know what you get with him. You know, he's a very good mover of the ball if he needs to move the ball. I think they did that well in that kind of final drive to get the kick and put Younghoe Koo into range to make it a pretty comfortable kick for him. You know, 30 plus yards is pretty solid for him when I don't think he's missed from over 50 for a good period of time. So yeah, and with the Panthers, I'm totally with you. I think it's really got last season written all over it, hasn't it? You know, the getting high on a quarterback that moves the offense relatively well and then all of a sudden comes crashing down. Oh, it's the quarterback. They're terrible. Let's bench them for somebody else and see if somebody else can change the dynamic. I think when you've not got McCaffrey, that's always going to be a problem. You know, when any team loses their best playmaker, then that's a problem. But equally, I think outside of him, there's really not a lot of talent. And I think, again, I'm probably with you on the fact that is Rule the guy that's holding the back, or is he driving this, direction that they want to go in? I'm not convinced that he's the solution to it. And certainly when you cycle through quarterbacks, I don't think you ever get it right. So, yeah, I mean, I think, again, if the Panthers have another bad game like they did the other night, which in truth probably looks likely based on how they performed in the last few games, I think the Falcons are good enough to pick them apart. The problem you've got, as if you're a Falcons fan, is that their defense is abysmal. Just at game management, see a game out, be comfortable, be confident and aggressive. And I think they often seem far too passive, and it lets teams come back into it. The Dolphins was the prime example. They were 20 plus points up, and then all of a sudden Tua orchestrates this comeback. And he wasn't playing particularly well at that point. He'd thrown a silly interception and not looked like he was driving the team forward all that well. But suddenly they make up a 20 plus deficit and they're right back in the tie. So I think that's the big problem for the Falcons. Their offense is good enough to hurt you, but equally their defense is bad enough to let you back in.
I'm kind of torn on this. I think it's obvious that the Panthers have slowed down a bit after the great start that they had. And a lot of that is going to be traced to Darnold, because Darnold has really, I don't want to say plummeted, but his play has really dropped off. And you're starting to see a couple of those bad Darnold traits that you saw at the Jets, those times that you'd have hoped by now he would have worked out of his system and kind of developed into a bit more of a more reliable quarterback. I think if you look at Matt Rule's comments from this week, he's kind of saying, I don't need Darnold to be a hero. I don't need Superman. I don't need massive plays. I just need him to run the offense. I think Rule has faith in what the Panthers can do. And I think he's looking at it from a sense of Darnold's just not executing. Maybe he's trying to go for it all when he just needs to go for 5 yards at a time. Because if you every time you run a play, you get 5 yards, you get a touchdown at the end of it. That's just how it works. From a Falcons point of view, I still think they're trying to work out who they are. I think we saw Kyle Pitts have a really big game in London. But I don't know, it's still just looking at it and just thinking the Falcons still, to me, don't jump out as an exciting team, as a team that's really, they're a year or so away from going anywhere. And I think, to me, this game is more about the Panthers proving that they're not on the slide and maybe they weren't overestimated than it is the Falcons maybe getting back into something.
For me, obviously, as a divisional game in the Bucs division, I hope they both lose, but I think they've gone in opposite trajectories. I think after week 3, we talked about teams that we thought were a mirage, and I picked the Broncos and the Panthers, and I think that's turned out to be the case. I think the Panthers have lost 4 straight since then. And the Broncos have either done the same or not much better. And you look at the Falcons, they had a rough kind of start to the season and didn't look great. And then they've won. We saw them win in London against the poor Jets team. They beat the Dolphins last week. And I don't know. I just think the Falcons are going in the right way. Like Aldrin said, I think they've now got Pitts, going a little bit. I think he's had a slow start to his career, but he's rolling a little bit now and looks like he's getting to grips with the game. The Panthers, it is a big game for them as well. You've got to take into consideration with the Panthers, all their preseason planning would have been for an offense with Christian McCaffrey in it, and he's played 1.5 or 2 games or whatever it was. So, that is their best player out, for weeks, and they're having to cope with that. So I think that definitely plays a part. I thought benching Darnold was an odd decision. I didn't see much of that game, but I think that was a mistake to have done so early in the season. And maybe that sent a message and they'll come out flying and put a load of points up and it will prove to be a smart coaching decision. But I think for me, they're just on, as I said earlier, on opposite trajectories. I think the Panthers are on the way down from where they were early in the season. The Falcons are actually outperforming probably where they were at the start of the season. I think I can see the Falcons taking this one.
So the only thing your point, Phil, about the Broncos and the Panthers is absolutely on point. The only thing that felt different for me is the Panthers played really well. I mean, the Panthers were brilliant in those first few weeks, whereas the Broncos got some good results. I really felt like the Panthers got off to such a great start. do you know what? I have really wrestled with this, and I could be made to look very foolish. You know, the Panthers have kind of the kind of feel of a team that could walk away with only 3 points the whole game. You know, they feel like they're kind of in that kind of self-destructive mode. But in terms of my team in Club Dub this week, I have gone for the Carolina Panthers. Four plays of the best music in NFL-based podcasting down. So that means we just get to whip around the room with our hot topic, and this week it's an easy one. I want you to tell me where Deshaun Watson goes and why. We're working on the principle that he will go somewhere. Should we stick with our usual order, which means I'm going to go Aldrin, JB, Phil, and then myself?
Well, I think a lot of the poor teams in the division would benefit from Deshaun Watson in terms of what he brings to a team on the field. I think he's, you know, an exceptional athlete, an exceptional quarterback, and I think he makes a lot of players around him better. The team that I'm going to say that he ends up at is probably the least contentious, and I do feel like the Miami Dolphins is both the obvious choice and the one that seems to make sense for all parties, mainly because the Dolphins, I don't know, ever since, I would say, middle of last year, I've never been convinced that they're all in on Tua. You know, I think they were relatively high on him going into the draft, and that seemed the obvious choice where they picked and that they were going to go for him. But I don't know, ever since, they don't seem to have been fully in on him. You know, they were tentative in easing him in last season. I know he was coming back from his injury and hadn't had the off season and this, that, and the other, but they never seemed, again, all in. You know, they were quite comfortable moving back to Fitzpatrick when they weren't doing well in particular games. And I think that spelled a lot of, you know, what they felt about him. And nothing really this season has kind of suggested to me that they think he's the guy for the next 10 years, let's say. You know, they might settle and say that he's the guy for this year. But there doesn't seem to be a long-term vision behind him. And I feel like there's a lot more that they could get out of that offense with a better quarterback. You know, I know they've had injury problems with a few of the receivers, but equally that wide receiver room contains Parker, Fuller, Jalen Waddle, you know, real top tier wide receivers, you would think. And they're not really getting much production out of any of those three. I know Phil's pulling a face, but I think those three are very good NFL receivers that should be putting up more points than they have been, with maybe Tua as part of a limiting factor. And I just think that Dolphins team, we talked about it last year, they seem to have had it all, you know, they got it all together. Flores was coaching them brilliantly, and we came into this season with really high hopes, and they've not lived up to it. But I feel like a lot of the core components are still there, and they need that spark to get them going and just, you know, kick that offense into a higher gear. And I think Deshaun Watson as a player would certainly give them that. So that would be my pick.
The Miami Dolphins get us off the board. JB, where do you want Deshaun Watson to end up and why?
I'm struggling with this because a part of me really wants Deshaun Watson to just stay at the Texans, because I think that's the solution to the Texans' problems, is just work things out with your superstar quarterback who has won games for you single-handedly in the past. But that doesn't seem very likely to happen. So looking at kind of the other lists of teams that we could have, I would want Jameis Winston. I would want Deshaun Watson to go to the Minnesota Vikings. Wow. Because I understand that there are members of this podcast that rate Kirk Cousins. I believe listeners will understand that I am not one of them. I think he is an absolute jobber that, much like Ryan Tannehill, limits the abilities of the Vikings to contend for anything. I think.
What do you think about the Ravens, JB? I mean, you've not made that clear.
I mean, imagine if Kirk Cousins ever plays on the Ravens. He would be like the universe would just collapse on itself.
I mean, the Ravens don't need Deshaun Watson. They've got a perfectly good quarterback of their own. They don't really need him.
I'll clip that
I
and
think,
use that in future pods.
I think the Vikings, Watson is an upgrade on Cousins. I think Watson running in that offense with Dalvin Cook, where you've then got the dual threat of, is Cook going to run? Is Watson going to run? Are they going to fake it to Cook and then pass it to Cook on a play action? Adding in then Jefferson and Thielen, it opens it out in a way that you would think would really put a bit of extra oomph in that Vikings offense and take some of the pressure off the defense, having to consistently contend with going so far down the field and then having to the offense come off and having the defense come back on to do it all over again. Plus, I think Deshaun Watson would look nice in purple.
There you go. How do you follow that, Phil? I mean, that level of insight is
what outfit do you think Deshaun Watson would look best in?
So Aldrin's got him in. What do the Dolphins call it? Do they call that aqua? They probably do. That is. It's a dolphin. So, yeah, okay. That makes sense. So we've got him in aqua. We've got him in purple. Go on. What colour are you putting Deshaun Watson in after the trade deadline?
For me, I think you kind of want to look at where the best landing spot for him would be that would make things interesting. I absolutely don't want him at the Panthers because I don't want him in the Buccaneers division. But if you're Deshaun Watson, if he could if McCaffrey could stay healthy, surely somewhere like the Panthers, who had a decent start to the season on D, would be an intriguing prospect for him. Their receivers are reasonably good. You've got DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson as examples. McCaffrey at running back, I think that makes them a really strong team. But I hope he doesn't land there. So for me, the two teams you're probably looking at are the Eagles or the Dolphins. I think the Eagles, in some places are a young team, in some places are an older team. Your offensive line, you've got Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson, and who knows how many years they're going to kind of be there. And the Broncos, I don't think have got a great deal. So I don't know that he'd be in any particularly better spot than he would be at the Texans, or that he was at the Texans. At least with the Texans, he had JJ Watt and DeAndre Hopkins with some star players around him. But I think if I'm looking at it, the Broncos have got a good receiving core, with Judy and Sutton as examples. They've got a promising running back with Javonte Williams. So I think, Noah Fant is a decent tight end. I think that it would give them they've been looking for that quarterback, and I think it would make that, legal troubles aside, and not sure what's going to happen there, but it would really bring that franchise back to the fore with something that they probably haven't had since Manning. So I think the Broncos would be a pretty intriguing prospect for Watson to land.
Nice. And JB made that point first that you just picked up on. That definitely bears repeating. It's such a strange situation in NFL terms because there's so much that could come out of this for both parties if the Texans and Watson could just sort out their differences, doesn't it? I mean, I just think at quarterback, they are really, really short of talent, the Texans. But maybe, this trade will see someone go the other way. So look, I think the logical places that he ends up are the Panthers or the Dolphins, although the Broncos is a good shout. For me, I think Sam Darnold or Tua Tagovailoa just benefit from knowing where the hell Deshaun Watson is. I think it just hanging over them doesn't really help either of them or those franchises. If they go and get him, well, good for them, and they've probably got a slightly higher ceiling. I think pretty much every team would have a slightly higher ceiling with Deshaun Watson, to be fair. But for me, the one that you mentioned, Phil, that stood out, you mentioned the Eagles there. And one of the things about the Eagles is you also mentioned earlier in this podcast, a couple of wins and the Eagles all of a sudden could be, in the playoff picture or, maybe only a step or two back from those really good teams and give themselves a chance. Now, there's another team in that division that I think are in that same boat, and it's the Washington football team. They're a team at the moment playing with a very hearty and very spirited quarterback. But I mean, it's a quarterback who's ultimately hurting them, I think, with his play. I think Heineke's, what was it like, the slide at the weekend where you kind of thought to yourself, the guy's just got to run into the end zone, sliding around and ultimately turning 7 points into 3 as a quarterback is not where you want to be. I just think Deshaun Watson with players like McLaurin and Samuel around him, I just think the Washington football team, a bit like you described with the Eagles, to be fair, could be instantly relevant. Whereas particularly the Dolphins are 1-6, right? They're too far back, aren't they? I mean, I think really you're then looking at what Deshaun Watson could do next season or maybe then the season after. You've also got to think about what are they going to give up to get Watson. They've got a lot of kind of draft capital at the moment. The Dolphins had a lot this season, but how much of that do you lose if you go out and get Watson as your QB? I think Washington would be a good fit and an interesting fit now. So that would be my left field choice. Well, only time will tell. One of us may have just had a crystal ball moment that gets snipped and used on a future podcast. In 7 days, we will be, I think, certain, won't we, where Deshaun Watson ends up. I can't imagine he'll still be a Texan the other side of the trade deadline with everything that's going around. But yeah, the Dolphins is an interesting one. Does Tua go somewhere else? There's a lot of different moving parts, isn't there? But yeah, I like it. I like the idea of Watson in any of those places because ultimately I think the game needs its absolute top-tier talent and its star players performing. So, for all the mess and all the troubles, let's hope we get there. So, gentlemen, 4 interesting Game of the Week picks. The fact the Cardinals aren't in Club Dub for a second consecutive week causes me some level of pain and discomfort, but I do understand the reasons why. But shall we, I was about to say, shall we all get together in a week's time and do it all again? But 3 of us will. We'll be a trio at best next week as Aldrin, enjoy your holly bobs. Enjoy Mexico. Hopefully you can find a TV and watch a game while you're out there. But we'll look forward to welcoming you back in a fortnight's time. But have a great week all. Catch you in 7 days.
Thanks, guys.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game